Hey everybody! Since Hurricane Dorian didn't raid my lab, that means you get to. Okay, so we're going to take a look at some infrared and radio frequency stuff for makers. And we're going to be relatively narrow on the definition. Obviously, especially when it comes to radio frequency, there's a lot of things that technically run on radio frequency, but we're gonna concentrate on the maker stuff, the 433 megahertz stuff. So the first thing that I buy, obviously in bulk, are these two things, and I've taken one of each of them out of the package. We have your very typical infrared receiver on the left and your sender on the right. Now, just because it's this dark color doesn't necessarily mean that it's the only type of sender. They also have them in clear, but this happens to be a dark blue one. Now, these things do come in different wavelengths. So I think this one's 940 nanometers, and I think they have some that go down into the 800s. And then these receivers also have different widths that they can receive on. In fact, if you look here, let me get one of these out of the package here. This one, let's compare these two. Whoops. Let's compare these two. So this one here has some shielding to try to prevent stray infrared from coming in at different angles, and this one is kind of more bulbous. It's really hard to see, but this one can receive closer to 180 degrees than this one. And so when you buy these things, you can buy them with different receiving zones and different wavelengths and all that stuff. And then in addition to the individual units, you can also buy them sort of pre-populated on these little breakout boards, which, I mean, I don't usually buy them this way for maker projects, but they come this way in kits a lot. You can get a sender or that same little receiver module. Let's see, focus. That same little receiver module can be populated on a little board like this. Again, they're more expensive this way and not as practical, but when you get it in a starter kit, you're almost always going to get it on some kind of board like that. So beyond those, there's a few other specialty sensors that you'll come across, and this one is an infrared proximity detector, and it works a lot like those ultrasonic sensors that are on the front of pretty much every robot on the face of the earth. And it's going to shoot out a beam and look for a reflection and see how long it takes and all that kind of stuff. So these are primarily used in robotics, and same with these. These are basically the same module, but they fire down. And what these are looking for are lines. So you'll put something like a black line of electrical tape on the ground, and it'll try to stay within that line. And you'll see I've got a video of a couple of different robots that have some line following stuff. A really cool one that's based on a microbit coming up too. So you can see one of these in action there. Then this is basically the same thing. It's a flame detector. And so this thing is looking for the similar waves coming in off of a flame. And yeah, here's another one on a breakout board. So that is some of your basic infrared stuff. There is one other class of item that I failed to mention, and it is these infrared repeaters, which are super nice if you get into using infrared around your house or around your lab. This one here has three inputs and 6 outputs. And basically what you can do is plug these little 1/8" jack things in so that you can have this receiver in your room, and then you can run up to 6 of them other places. And you can see they just come with tons of cords. And so if you have a infrared that needs to go around a corner or something like that, these things are very cool, and they're like $10 a piece, and just another kind of cool infrared little gadget. So when it comes to maker projects, a lot of times we build things and then take them apart and build different things with those same parts. But there's one thing that I keep built 100% of the time, and it sits on a shelf and I use it all the time, is this universal receiver. And what this is it does not really need to be on a mega, but it is a IR receiver plus a 433 megahertz RF receiver that is set that when it detects either of these signals, it will decode them and send them out the serial monitor. Now, for the purpose of this video, I've also added an HC06 Bluetooth module so I can send it out to a phone. But for the most part, I keep this on the shelf, and when I'm working with either the 433 megahertz remotes or something involving infrared, I pull the thing out and I can just immediately point a device at it and push the button and it'll get decoded. And I can take those codes and use them in other projects. So I will leave in the description how to make one of these things. I will leave the code for you so that you can make one of these. Highly recommend you keep one of these things on your shelf. So a perfect example of how I use this universal receiver thing is my bathroom door project. It has some LEDs on it and they're operated with one of these universal remote controls. And I didn't want to have to use a remote control to trigger the lights. I wanted my Arduino to automatically trigger them in sync with the music. So what I did was I pulled out my trusty receiver and I pushed the red button and got the codes from the remote for that. And I did the same thing with the green button and the blue button and purple button and all that stuff. And then I was able to make my own infrared remote with an Arduino and hide that behind the door. So basically that Arduino receives an MQTT message and knows that it should hit the red button, and then 4 seconds later it should hit the green button, and then a couple seconds later it should hit the purple button and all that kind of stuff. And so just a really super simple way to simulate actually having a remote. And while we're at it, the same thing happens with these 433 megahertz stuff. So that this is not infrared, this is radio frequency. And when I click this, you're going to see that it's going to give the information of the remote. It's going to give the little remote code. And so as I push these different buttons, I'm getting different codes. And that makes this stuff super easy to work with because I can just put that 1647 thing in my code and broadcast out 433 megahertz. So speaking of 433 megahertz, depending on where you live, these things are slightly different. Some countries I think use 315 megahertz, some use 433, but generically I just call them all 433 megahertz. They're super cheap, insecure radio frequency remotes and devices. So let's take a look at those. Okay, so this is a little sample of some of the 433 megahertz stuff, and basically, these are the things I use the most. My house has a bunch of ceiling fans that all have 433 megahertz remotes with them. The problem is that they're not programmable. And the problem with pretty much everything here is that it's not programmable either. So what did I do? I took little ESP8266s and I made a universal transceiver, which basically what it does is it takes the fixed signal from this, and when it receives it, it sends out a corresponding signal that matches with the fixed signal of the fan. And I have these little switches all over my house. I wanted to show you these because they're really cheap, and they come with a little cover on them that make them look nicer. But I'm going to open them up, and what you can see here is that each of these things is actually the same. They all have 3 buttons in here, and 1, 2, 3, and so this is made to just push the center button. There's a little tab in here is made to just push the center button, or this one is made to push all 3 buttons. What I tend to do is when I build my universal receiver, these 2 things actually work. These 2 buttons on the side, even if it's not supposed to push them, it can push them. So what I do is if you get this or this or this, then send out whatever you would have wanted for this, because this is just for turning the light on and off. I use this for turning the light on and off in my bathroom. So if you rock it over here, if you rock it over here, if you push it in the center, if my receiver detects either of those 3 things, then go ahead and send out the thing to toggle the light. Now, another thing you'll notice is that I have an 8 written on here in Sharpie, and this one has a 3 written on it. And so what I do when I get these things is I come in and use my little receiver to detect the codes for all these things and just say, 8-1 is this code, 8-2 is this code, 8-3 is this code, and I keep them stored in a spreadsheet so that when I go to pull out one of these things, I don't have to go back to my universal receiver and find out what the code is for these things. I can just put it straight in service. So these are really awesome. Similarly, these little things from AliExpress are maybe $1 or $2, and I use these all the time. They have great range. This one has an A, B, C, and D button, and they just put out nice, clean, easy codes. and I'm able to use them for all kinds of projects. My wife is a teacher, and she has a red light, green light, yellow light thing in her classroom, and if the kids are being loud, she can hit the C button and it's going to turn the red light on. Or, you know, if we game show buzzers and stuff like that, the game show presenter can click one of these buttons to reset that thing. There's just a bajillion uses for these kind of things. Now, another thing I discovered, let me grab a spudger and I'll be right back. So these little things come apart really easily, and there's a little bit of tape over them. Let's see if I can get a good shot there. A little bit of tape over them, but the contacts on them are huge. And so if you break those little bubbles off right here, these little bubbles here, or you come down here to the contacts where all those things come together, these things make fantastic little embedded receivers. So what I'll do sometimes is I'll even take a 4-button remote like this, and I'll just connect a normal arcade button or a normal push button to the contacts on these pins, so that I can use this battery powered thing and it'll run for years. And I just stick it in there and, you know, I'll push a button and it's going to send out a 433 megahertz signal. So these things are very sweet for little embedded projects. You'll see they use two 2016 batteries, or I'm guessing you'd use a 2032, whatever, I don't know. But right now they use two 2016 batteries, but they come with them and they're like $2. So these things, don't just think about them for this kind of project. Think about embedding these things. Think about what you could do if you were to stick this thing in a device with no cords and a regular push button. What could you do with it? Now, the last kind of remote I've started buying are these, and maybe I'll link to it in the description, but these are actually programmable, and it's a very weird set of commands. They come pre-programmed, but if you push and hold this and let go of that, then you can actually learn remote codes. So I have one like this, like my wife has the main control for the ceiling fan and stuff with our remote in the bedroom, but I have another one that I've programmed, and I can just, you know, A turns the light on and off, and C turns the fan on high and stuff like that. So for $2 you can make a nice little fob to add an extra remote to something that's 433 megahertz. And these are also well built. I mean, this has got real screws on there, and this feels heavy, and these are like $2 or $3. So definitely worth checking out the programmable remotes also. And last but not least, I am really bad at mixing these things up. So I always write what they are on them, but these are the little transmitters and receivers for 433 megahertz. I kind of like, those are still connected. I kind of like these. They can work without a remote, or you can solder on one of these little copper remotes. They've stopped including the copper remotes sometimes. And so what I did is I basically just figured out how long they need to be, and I started wrapping my own copper remotes for these things, or copper antennas, I guess I should say, for these things. And yeah, these modules are super cheap, and you can get pretty decent distance out of them. And so if you want to hook them up to an Arduino board, these are what you need. So that's about all I have on infrared and RF, but I really do want to thank you guys for watching. I know I say thanks for watching at the end of pretty much every video, but I really appreciate all the encouragement. I appreciate all the people who like the videos and subscribe and all that kind of stuff. The last couple months I've just been doing this for the fun of it, as a little bit of a diversion, but you guys have really made this fun. So truly, thanks for watching.